Good evening, guys. This is Mr. Lamond, and this is your AP US History Unit 12 World War II test review. So this is what I sent you out on a YouTube channel. If you have not gone through this yet, stop this, go find the test review, and come back later to the test review answers. If you're doing this, then you could pause the video right here and check your work, see how you did. But here we go. So Truman, president credited with saving millions of lives with his difficult decision to drop the atomic bomb on Hiroshima. Chamberlain was the English prime minister who appeased Hitler at the Munich conference. MacArthur was your Pacific general who left the Philippines promising to return, a little too late for the Bataan Death March people. Benito Mussolini, Italian JV dictator, ended up not doing so well at the end. Eisenhower was the D-Day planner and orchestrator. One of the reasons we elect Ike as president is he won the Super Bowl. Nimitz planned Midway, the turning point in the Pacific. Hitler was your Third Reich use of the Blitz. Stalin, the naive victim of the non-aggression pact that he signed with Hitler. Churchill, the Prime Minister of England, inspired the Royal Air Force and the Brits to never give up during the Blitz on Britain. George Marshall was the main logistics general for the United States. He wanted to be an offensive coordinator, but they made him be general manager instead. FDR had the United States somewhat prepared, even though we were isolationist. And Oppenheimer, the very scientific sounding name, led the Manhattan Project. Page 2, putting things in order, chronology. German nationalism being wounded at Versailles at the end of World War I. Of course, that was one of the main causes of World War II. 1937, FDR quarantines the U.S. because of how poorly they were behaving, grabbing land, especially in China. 1939, Hitler blitzes Poland, and then France. 1940, we have the Selective Service Act, which is a fancy name for a draft, which gets us somewhat prepared, not really, for the war. December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor, a date which will live in infamy. The United States enters the war. Then we have the Battle of Midway in 42, where 4 Japanese carriers are sank, and we begin island hopping strategy. June 6, 1944, the beaches of Normandy are stormed at D-Day. Late Christmas 44, early 45, Hitler's last stand, the Battle of the Bulge. And then the Japanese are brought to surrender, and we warn the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics with an extra atomic weapon and the formation of the United Nations. Last on this review, we are trying to compare things. A pre-World War II idea term was one from Unit 12. So the key for this, guys, is make sure you can connect what these first terms are. For instance, Schenck versus United States allowed for clear and present danger, which allowed for wartime civil liberties to be suspended, which of course is what happened to many Japanese Americans with Korematsu versus the U.S. Anaconda Plan was the northern strategy in the Civil War, led to island hopping. Bonus Army was the promise to pay World War I vets. GI Bill was the promise to give them housing and education. Flappers and suffrage were post-World War I women and the gains they made. Rosie the Riveter and the baby boom, different kind of gains. Dawes Severalty Act, that was the accommodation of Native Americans on reservations. And Executive Order 9066 was FDR's order to accommodate Japanese Americans in internment camps. Kellogg-Briand Pact was the hopeful, let's not have another war to end all wars. The United Nations was the post-World War II group that was started mostly because we learned our lesson by not joining after World War I in the League of Nations. King Andrew Jackson, one of our presidents who ruled with extreme power, of course none more than FDR with his 4 terms, led to the 22nd Amendment. Margo Act of 1807 was an anti-trade act. Same with the quarantine speech. No Man's Land, you'll be looking for Blitzkrieg on your sheet. This was typed in later. But yes, those were the strategies for the different wars. Trail of Tears was the very negative treatment of the Native Americans. Japanese negative treatment of the Philippine-based American soldiers was the Bataan Death March. World War I technology, machine guns and barbed wire. World War II aircraft carriers and bombers. Turning point battles in the Civil War, Gettysburg. Turning point battle in the Pacific was Midway. Turning our attention to the action-reaction. So in this first group, I'm just going to give you the letters and then hit some highlights. So for 1 through 7, you would have had B-A-R, So there's a really good job, if you notice, that you can go back and forth between what comes first. Allied leaders meet with Hitler. Because they met with Hitler, Allied leaders appeased Hitler. U.S. remains neutral. Okay, so just kind of going back and forth. The second set, 8 through 14, W, C, V, M, Z, K, S. Early years of the war and mostly U.S. involvement / not involvement. Okay, the third set, number 15, Y, C, C, L, U, N, B, B, D. And then the final set, would be E, T, O, F, A, A, J, X. So you can check over your answers on those, and we'll turn our attention to the limericks. Europe's plan to appease Hitler as he built up troops and took back land. Peace in our time, but a blitzkrieg of Poland was what he planned. Held off Stalin and the Soviets with a non-aggression pact. After France's Maginot Line failed to defend his attack, the Luftwaffe blitzed Britain, but the RAF made its stand. And that's 12.1, the beginning of the war. Next one on the bottom here, across North African deserts to get near the Italian shore, then up through Italy's boot, why Stalin fought to even the score. Operation Overlord was our triumphant D-Day. We marched into Germany, handled the bulge, and ended Hitler's sway. Though it sadly revealed the final solution as death camps were crimes of war. Let's go over here to the top right, this one over here. The Japanese overran the Pacific, the empire of the rising sun. We struggled for revenge until the Battle of Midway was won. Hopping from Iwo Jima to the next island in amphibious and jungle fights. Remember the Bataan Death March, kamikazes, and the Japanese don't fly whites, white flag for surrender. Unconditional surrender was gained when Hiroshima was atomically undone. That's 12.3 Pacific War. Last two, starting here. The war ended with the Iron Curtain set in place. The Soviets had taken Eastern Europe as satellites to win the Cold War race. Japan was rebuilt, and the veterans were given the GI Bill. Rosie the Riveter and Tuskegee Airmen revealed unseen skill. But Korematsu's case in internment camps revealed racism's ugly face. 12.4. The end of the war, and then FDR lended and leased England our industrial might. We wanted to remain isolated, but Hitler's madness was in sight. The Selective Service Act helped the Army's numbers to rise, but Pearl Harbor was still an infamous surprise. The War Productions Board mobilization and rationing helped to win the fight. That's 12.2 American mobilization, 12.3. Okay, you can see Uncle Sam here in bed, another Dr. Seuss cartoon, trying not to catch the contagiousness of Hitleritis and Stalin-itch and the Blitzpox and the Nazi fever. So Uncle Sam is very happy he's got separate beds. He's smiling. They look miserable. So this is definitely A, support for the arguments of isolationists. So there ends your test review. Remember, the test is tomorrow, Friday. You've got 2 sets. Do each one independently. Best wishes.